Hello, everyone. I am going to be joined by my friend tonight, John Arthur. Good to see you again, John.
Good to be here, sir.
Yeah, so you wanted to talk about space. I wanted to talk about space. We both found that we had an interest in space exploration, space expansion, and it's interesting that you now are of the generation that is seeing this revitalization of the whole space movement that I grew up with, and it was so exciting to me in my young years, my teenage years, watching the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, and ultimately getting to the moon and placing that flag on the moon. That was in spite of all my issues with America and what it was doing around the world in those days, I felt proud. I felt a moment of pride when Armstrong placed that flag on the moon. And I, even at that young age, remember thinking to myself, now this is what America's about. This is what this bold, risk-taking adventure that we pulled off. And this is so much better than squabbling with each other. And of course, at that point, I had grown up under as my generation did, had grown up under the threat of nuclear war. And we remember well the exercises in grade school of duck and cover, where we had to, take refuge under our desks. And even in first and second grade, I clearly recall that nobody 7 or 8 years old doing that had any belief that this was somehow going to save us. But anyways, the idea of space exploration, to me, was a very valuable alternative to the other side of the technological equation of our life at that time in the 50s and 60s. And so it served as a sort of an outlet for me to dream about the possibilities of what we would do when, we went into space. And I mentioned in the opening, one of my favorite visionary artists of the time was Chesley Bonestell. And I inherited a book from my older brother. It was a book published in 1950. So I wasn't even born yet when this book was published, but it was the artistic visions of Chesley Bonestell and how he envisioned our expansion into space way back then in those years post World War II. He did continue with his artwork into the 50s and 60s. There he is, yes. So yes, he died in 1986. Yeah, there we go. An American painter, designer, and illustrator, a pioneering creator of astronomical art. His paintings inspired the American space program. Yes, they did. And many of the scientists, engineers, and things that by the 1970s were actually working for the space program, even the late 60s. Yes, as children and as young people, they were looking at this book, just like I got to show you this. So this actually here is my original copy that I inherited from my older brother, Freddie. And you can see it's seen its better day. Actually, the book itself, I think I need to do something to tape up and preserve this cover. But this was an original edition of his book. And some of my very earliest memories of looking at books were this one. Because it was around. It was probably at that point in my older brother's room, and I would sneak in there to look at his comic books and whatever else. He had this book. So I would look at it, and eventually we got older, and somehow it ended up in my possession. So this was literally one of the first books, that I ever looked at as a child. Probably, like kindergarten age, maybe even earlier than that. And I was just utterly entranced by the images within this book. And I know that it made an impression on me that has kind of lasted for all these decades. And so it's really wonderful for me now, because one of my great disappointments over the past couple of decades is how we've let our space program sort of just hibernate. It's kind of been sidelined for the most part ever since the great thrust, to get to the moon, the Apollo program. We built this incredible fleet of Saturn rocket ships. And then At the end of Apollo, they just got decommissioned and put out in fields to rust, basically. When I first went to the Huntsville Air and Space Museum, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, I went up there and toured it. And first thing you see when you come in the parking lot is this big rusting hulk of a Saturn rocket sitting in the field there next to the parking lot. And I remember seeing that and thinking, yes, this is kind of an iconic statement here of what happened. And I almost see in that rusting hulk of the Saturn rocket almost the mindset that would invest that money to create that capability, that spacefaring capability, and then just let it go. Just like invest the billions of dollars and then just, okay, sorry, we're spending too much on the Vietnam War. We can't afford the space program anymore. And that's essentially what it was. So anyways, the space shuttle had possibilities, but again, it was done on a shoestring. It was sort of a second run, B-roll kind of thing. It was just done as an afterthought, largely to keep a lot of the aerospace engineers and scientists employed, if nothing else. And we can see what happened. There was just a different mindset at the time. And we saw the Discovery and the Challenger, both these two horrible disasters that really derailed America's space program. Those back-to-back disasters and the death of those astronauts. And so, to me, it's very exciting that we're in this time now where we see this revival of the space program. It's largely being driven by the private sector, which to me, again, is a great development. I love it. Now, I think what the private sector is doing is inspiring NASA to get its ass in gear and get its act back together. I have no doubt that the Trump administration is going to be very pro-space program and will undoubtedly, and I really hope that he does follow through on dramatically reducing military spending, and then diverting some of that money over to NASA so they can get on with the Artemis program. I mean, they're already struggling under the Biden administration. They were already struggling with restricted funding. And so they've had to delay Artemis 2, which was already supposed to have launched, right? So the investment in space is so valuable, and the importance of space development is so critically important to the future of our civilization that, yes, we need to do it. And even though I definitely prefer the private sector, look, we have NASA. We've invested billions and billions of dollars over the decades into NASA. A lot of good people working at NASA who with a lot of experience that they can bring to the table. NASA has done a lot of good stuff. Now, in spite of their failures, they have not really become politicized to the same extent that a lot of the other, like NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is now in the Trump administration's gun sights, has become thoroughly politicized and have really their original mission of monitoring the Earth and the space environments in which we live got sidelined to a large extent with the whole climate change movement and became advocates, promoters of climate change propaganda. And in many of my writings and lectures and stuff, I address specific things that NOAA did that were really just clearly propagandistic and not really part of NOAA's original scientific mandate. So now I'm hoping that under Trump, that NOAA gets back to its original mission, in which case, then I would put NOAA, NASA, and the U.S. Geological Survey as three of the government organizations that have actually provided real value for the money that they spent, unlike most of the other organizations of government. So anyhow, this is exciting to me that, here, I'll say one more thing before we actually get into some of the specifics of what's going on now. And I believe we have some great photographs here of some of Chesley's work just to share with people. But before that, I will say that, if there were not for billionaires, there would be no civilian private space program, right? If it wasn't for the billionaires. So this is something that seems to be completely absent from the radar screen of the progressive left Democratic side of the political spectrum, who wants to do away with billionaires. They want to take the money from the billionaires and dispense it. That's all part of the whole political scheme to, well, equity. That would be equity. In the name of equity, we have to take the resources of the billionaires and disperse it amongst the masses, which is basically, of course, just a Marxist tactic. But the point is that if they had their way, and we see a lot of Democrats in Congress literally promoting the idea of a 90% tax on the billionaires, talking about all of the things that could be done with the money of the billionaires if it was only dispersed amongst all of the the marginalized communities and so on. And of course, that dispersion is going to take place in government agencies, right? Well, what do we already know? We already know, look, anybody who was not asleep at the wheel already knew what Doge is now presenting, is that most of what the government was spending was waste, right? We knew that it was, we just didn't know the specifics. We didn't know how much precisely was being wasted, but we knew that huge amounts of resources and the money were being wasted.
Yeah, $4.7 trillion in treasury payments just missing.
Mhm.
They just found out.
Right.
But so all of that could have sent us to the moon and back a couple times. Now, I wasn't
Oh, yes.
born in the in the time to see us make the moonshot, but I remember the ISS gave us high hopes in the 90s. Us 90s kids were super excited to see the cooperation between these former Cold War wouldn't be agitators, participants now actually working for one common goal for the exploration of space.
Yes,
it was really a cool time, the 90s. It's really sad that space exploration kind of fell to the side. I feel like when the priorities of the government really shifted towards entitlements and focusing on sowing this discord between people.
Yes. That's, to me, was half the equation of what happened. On the one hand, and this is, going back to the Clinton years, and the Clinton years were planting the seeds for the later takeover of the whole woke movement, this whole leftist narrative. That all started pretty much in the Clinton years. And then it was capped off by 9/11 and the war on terror. So basically the left went all down this woke pathway into all of this, quasi-Marxist stuff. And then on the right, you had the war of terror. And so that diverted, we had this enormous expansion of military spending. We had this, essentially this refocusing of our attention on the Middle East and the whole question of the war on terror. And so sort of with the shifting of priorities, the space program really got subordinated, got pushed down the hierarchy of needs and wants and priorities. And now it's potentially going to change. And so we went from the Clinton years, and it's interesting that you say you were a child of the 90s, but that was, in my opinion, that was kind of the last decade where children were still more free, and that really changed after 9/11, after the new century began. That really changed. You were like the last of the generation where we were on our own. I certainly grew up in the 50s and 60s being on our own. My little brother Rowan, my partner, Rowan, you've met Rowan. He was 5 and 6 years old, and he would be walking a mile home from first grade. Nobody thought anything of it.
We could go visiting to each other's houses. We go kick cow patties out in the middle of the field, go climb trees.
Oh, yeah, all of
kids.
That. As kids, yeah. And we would go out. I remember those summer days, go out I'm leaving, we're going, and we'd even have backpacks, and we'd say so long, and we're going to be camping out back by Reimer's Lake. Now, Reimer was a farm near where we lived, and the youngest son of the 10 kids was my age, and we were best friends, and they had a private lake on their back property. We'd head out there, and they wouldn't see us till the next day. We'd literally go with our backpacks. We'd take a tent. We'd set up the tent. We'd bring foods, and we're doing this. We're 9. I think. Let's see. The first time we did that, I was 13. So it was me, 13, my pal, 12, my younger brother, 11, and then Rowan, 9. And the 4 of us would go out, and we would literally be gone overnight. And then we'd come back sometime, maybe the next afternoon, and nobody thought anything of it. You know, hell, we lived on a lake, and we would go out there. We would be swimming, canoeing. We didn't wear life jackets. I remember at one point I did start throwing a life jacket into the canoe when I would go out. But I swam across the lake and back again. So I'm like, well, what's going to happen if I tip over? Well, I knew how to flip the canoe up and get back in it, And what if I had to flip over, I could easily swim to shore. I mean, I could swim a mile or two, no problem. But anyways, yeah, that was the point. We get to the point, and I'm going to tell the story, and then I want to get back to Chesley. About 12 or 15 years ago, I was doing classes, and I was in a building where it was a 3-story building, and I had the upper floor was donated to me to hold classes in, and I would hold a class there every week. And this was maybe 3-4 months. I held a series of classes there. The bottom floor was being turned into an after school. The woman who leased the bottom floor was going to start an after school care business, right? And so she was getting all the stuff and getting it. Well, I'm up there every week. I'd come and I'd say hello to her, and she was there getting everything ready, for the kids and all that. And then, you have to apply for a certificate that allows you to do this. You have to get a license, right? So she had applied for the license. Anyways, I'd come there and say, well, how's it going? When are you going to open? She said, well, I'm hoping in 2 to 3 weeks, right? Well, then 2 to 3 weeks would go by, and I'd come in there and I'd say, hey, how's it going? You about to open? Well, the city came by and they said I had to do this and I had to do that. So I'm doing this. So this went on for like 3 months, right? She hasn't opened, right? Meanwhile, she's spending her savings to try to. So one evening I come in, and to get into the building, there was a parking lot in the back. And they had taken part of the area behind the building, fenced it off, and it was turned into the playground for these kids. And to get into the building, I would go in the back door, but I would have to go through this area next to the parking lot that was being turned into the playground. So I come in there one evening, right? I come in, I open the gate, and I'm walking through, and I notice there's like three or four trees in there. And I noticed that they're all wrapped in bubble wrap. And I thought, that's interesting. Why did somebody wrap those trees in bubble wrap? I mean, from like ground level up to like 6 feet high, they're wrapped in bubble wrap. I go in and I see the lady. I don't remember her name. And I said, oh yeah, I'm doing fine. Yeah, I'm just curious. So I came in. What's going on? The trees are wrapped in bubble wrap. And she says, oh, well, the city made me do that before I could get my license approved, because I guess the fear of the children getting hurt. I said, what? Is that, no, wait a minute. You're kidding, right? This is a joke. She said, no. They were not going to release the license until I wrapped the trees in bubble wrap. At that point, John Arthur, I go, okay.
That's why we're not exploring the stars yet. We're afraid to let kids climb trees. How are they going to
This is exactly the point. Yes, that's exactly it. And that's right. This is why we're not doing these bold and risky ventures, right? Because if we're raising kids who can't climb trees and have to in their play, and we're talking, 5 and 6, 7-year-olds. I mean, what? Really? Like, I still can't believe it when I think about it. But that was kind of where I realized that, wait a second, I don't know if this is the human species or if this is America, but if it's America, hey, we're going downhill here if we're raising kids who can't climb trees. We gotta rip that bubble wrap down. I mean, this is kind of, to me now, like a metaphor for what we need to do. We need to rip that bubble wrap off the trees and say, kids, climb those trees. And yeah, you might fall off. You might fall off and break an arm. You might. I was 2 years old and climbing to the top of kitchen cabinets and fell off and broke my arm, right? So, I mean, this happens to kids. It's part of growing up, and you don't want it to happen, but it's going to happen.
Learn.
But, you know, here's the thing. You know, there's a trade-off. So, to me, the broken arm was a small price to pay growing up an independent person, which is what it is. You see, because what's happening now is that childhood insulation, the world out here, becomes a mental state, and you grow up. Because when I was college age, if you had said safe spaces on canvas, people would have looked at you like you were crazy. Like, what are you talking about? Safe spaces, or, you know, trigger warnings, or the things we see now. I mean, it would have been unfathomable back in the day that, you know, if Richard Nixon beat Hubert Humphrey, that you're going to have a bunch of liberals weeping on television. You know, it's gotten to the point where the whole thing the pendulum has gone too far, and it's got to start swinging back the other way. And I think it is. And that's why I'm excited that I think we've got the momentum. You know, the swing has been going this way. And what happens when it starts its return? You get behind it and you give it a good push. So I say, let's do that. Let's get behind this swinging pendulum and give it a good push out in the direction of freedom.
I think so.
Of liberty. And let's get on with it. So, yeah, back to Chesley. As it says, he was pioneering creator. Inspired the American space program. Well, let's bring him back, and hopefully somebody watching this might get inspired. So this was something very archetypal about this.
Iconic. Just beautiful.
Yes, isn't it? His handling of light was really exceptional. This is one of his later paintings. I think this was like even in the 80s. Let's see.
I did a double take. I thought that was a CAD drawing the first time I looked at it.
Oh, it's his painting, Descent to the Moon. Okay, lunar mining.
It's coming.
It's coming. It's coming. And here's the first human footprint on Mars that he's envisioning. I should have gotten the years of these. Oh, there it is, 1956. Okay. So yeah, I was 5 years old. I don't think this painting was in my book, though. But this one was. This is another iconic. This is one of his most famous. Let's see, there was a quote with this one. Oh, yeah. 1944, Saturn viewed from Titan. This painting has been called the painting that launched 1,000 careers. Again, this would have been one of his later ones. This was spaceships descending to the lunar surface. So, hopefully within the next 1 to 2 to 3 years, we're going to be seeing this. Well, Japan and China have already done it. We're going to talk about that. This is Saturn viewed from Titan. Is that the right painting? I don't know. This looks like this one might be mislabeled. No. Okay, well, this would be the Exploration of Mars book cover Winged rocket ferry orbits Mars. A winged rocket ferry. Now, let's see. So you came up, you were how old in the 90s? You were pretty much just
I was a 94 baby, but my grandfather, father and I were all very much. My grandfather worked on the Titan and Apollo modules out of Rockwell and down.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Well, okay, so it's in your blood, it's in your genes.
Yes, sir. We have a multi-generational patent on the first inertial propulsion space drive.
I didn't know that.
No, yeah. This is really interesting stuff to me. So when NASA got canned in 2008 by our favorite president, Barack Obama, basically stripped NASA down. There's no interest in the space program. We were in talks about implementing this new fuelless propulsion to keep satellites in orbit. You lose at the time we were losing about $10 billion a year in just need for extra rocket fuel. So yeah.
Wow.
Man.
Yeah. Well, you can see how I was so engrossed, enchanted. I could spend literally hours just in my room absorbed in this book. And then, of course, then I got to be 7 and 8 and I started learning how to read, and then I could read the text. Saturn as seen from Mimas. Is it Mimas or Mimas? Mimas? That's one of the Saturnian moons. (1954) painting, Can We Get to Mars? What do you want to bet that Elon Musk has seen this book and knows of his work?
I bet he has. By the way, it's my mess.
My mass.
Okay, I went and looked it up. Like my mass, gravitational mass.
My mass. Yeah, my mass. Okay, good. This is ships orbiting Mars. Now, I would envision, one of our first objectives, an early objectives of Martian colonization would be building of a spaceport as the first thing that we need as we get back to the moon, is we need to, and of course I would advocate an international joint venture of building a spaceport that would be available for all of humanity. In any nation that wants to become spacefaring, then particularly the U.S. and Russia, we have the most experience in space activity. But China, India, Japan, and now the Arab countries, they're all getting on board. And I want to see America stay in a position of leadership. And the only way we're going to do that is if the American people come to their senses and wake up. Now, one big difference between our perspectives on this whole thing now and when, I was coming up learning about the space program, nobody in the 60s, 70s, 80s, really even into the 90s, were thinking about space development, space exploration, the importance of that within the context of planetary catastrophes. But that is now a factor that cannot be dismissed. It's too prominent of a factor in planetary history and human history to ignore. And I think we have to be, when we start thinking big picture and we start thinking about the expansion into space, this is now a critical motive for moving ahead and moving into space, because we now realize that, we're vulnerable. We are cosmically vulnerable, as I've said, and I don't know if I originated this or not, but I've said it for years, for decades, which is that we are sitting ducks in a cosmic shooting gallery. And I'd like to cite this near miss from last June, when, we had a 500 to 800 foot asteroid fly way within the orbit of the moon. And
It's not it's not an Armageddon situation. It's something much, much smaller. The Bruce Willis movie overplays the.
Oh yeah.
Right. It's silly, but if you have something that's 800 foot in diameter,
800 feet would pretty much annihilate an area the size of the state of Pennsylvania, roughly. It would not cause locally, it would extinguish all life, right? Globally, no, it would not be a mass extinction event that would leave enough of a fingerprint in the fossil record that could be discerned hundreds of thousands or millions of years down the future. However, what it would do is it would send civilization reeling into a tailspin that might take a decade to recover from, because you would have a huge amount of particulate matter and soot and so forth launched into the atmosphere. And this is going to create a shroud that's going to take easily 2 to 3 years or longer to fully clear out. That is going to cause all kinds of climatic changes. The most immediate effect of it's going to be is after all the secondary firestorms have died down, would be a global cooling that could be equivalent to some of the most extreme years of the Little Ice Age. Well, what did we see in those extreme years of the Little Ice Age was, repeated agricultural failures and food shortages, which led to famine. And those famine led to people being weak. Their immune systems were compromised. And you have large numbers of people with compromised immune systems. This is when opportunistic diseases can cause real pandemics. This is what happened in the early 1300s with the bubonic plague. It was a rapid cooling of the Earth's climate. It's what happened at the Justinian plague in 542 AD. Came on the heels of like 5 or 6 years of an extreme climate anomaly, cold climate anomaly. Well, that's what we would have. And so it would be immediately in the immediate zone of the impact. If it was in a populated area, would be 1 million to 2 million people instantly vaporized to nothing. And then out to 20 to 40 miles radius, you would have all kinds of secondary consequences. 20 miles away from the impact, people are going to be receiving 2nd and 3rd degree burns. 20 miles away, people will be killed by maybe 15 miles away, people would be killed by the sound of the blast. The audio would rupture eardrums, and the fireball in the immediate location of the impact would be about 3 miles in diameter. About 3 miles in diameter. That's pretty hard to envision. Well, in the immediate area of the impact, you're going to have total and utter devastation. Most of the population of the Earth is going to survive the impact. But there's going to be these cascading secondary consequences that are going to take years to fully play out and recover from. And so, it would certainly be in our best interest to prevent something like that. Now, that particular asteroid that passed by the Earth in June was only discovered 2 weeks earlier. But this is why we need a space presence, and why, I think you and I had talked about the proposal to offload a lot of our knowledge and technology and so forth to the moon. And that a moon would be the obvious place to build a time capsule that could survive, let's say, a global catastrophe. Now, I'm not anticipating a global catastrophe in the near future, although you can't rule it out. And a lot of my lectures and this podcast itself are going to be addressing the probabilities factors of catastrophe. Obviously, the kind of catastrophe we just described, which would not leave the major imprint, could be discerned thousands of years from now, nonetheless would be an extremely severe event that could literally lead to hundreds of millions of deaths ultimately, right? That is something that we as a society, as a civilization, need to be prepared for, because this is not science fiction. This is not pie in the sky. This is not Armageddon Bruce Willis style, because like what you talked about there, is totally unlikely to happen. The odds of an asteroid, what was it, the size of Texas or something?
Yeah.
And that was just ridiculous. And you could have had just as dramatic of a storyline without going so unrealistic. But what we can see is that even an object from 500 to 1,000 feet in diameter is going to have global consequences. And if it hit in the ocean, you're going to have all the coastlines on the ocean it hit in are going to have major tsunami events, right? So anyways, us going into space, humanity going into space, is part of the antidote to that. It's a way that we can maximize, we can shift the probabilities in our favor, right? And part of going into space would be that we use space as a platform to really become intimately knowledgeable about our cosmic environment and the more immediate threats. You know, we just here, what just recently discovered that there is coming by in 2032, right? An asteroid that has right now 2.7% chance of hitting the Earth. Now this is the most dangerous asteroid yet discovered, with the highest odds of striking the Earth. It's not huge. I've forgotten the size of it. I should have brushed up on that before the podcast here, but you might look it up. 2032 asteroid impact, and let's see what we get here. But yeah, once we've moved into space, our options for responding to that increase exponentially. Because for one thing, we're already in a position that we could harness dangerous objects, perhaps deflect them from their orbit, if not harvest them and their resources altogether. And of course, all of this stuff is not just flying at us randomly from deep space. It's all out there orbiting. It's in orbits. These orbits are calculable. We can determine the shape of their orbits, the tempo of their orbits, and we see something, we can predict where it's going to be in the future. And we can then access those objects, the most threatening ones, which it turns out are incredibly valuable with all kinds of resources. You finding anything at all?
So yeah, real quick. Its rating on the Torino scale is a 3. 1 in 32 chance of hitting as of this most recent article via the new Atlas. So 2.7, its impact probability peaked at 2.7, but it scored... No, excuse me. This is Apophis. The 2032 asteroid is a 3. Is a 3 on the Torino scale.
Okay, so does it
0 to 10? 10 is 100% chance likely, and 0 is 0.
And 3 is
significant.
It's very significant. What's the size of it again? We can get.
I'm looking right now.
Size isn't the only variable.
40 to 90
40
meters
to 90.
wide.
Okay, 90. Okay, so let's say it's 75 meters. Okay, so that's bigger than Tunguska. That's at least 50% bigger than Tunguska.